Hello, welcome to my podcast. My name is Alexander Kasparuk, and today we're talking about a very specific and interesting topic on a certain distinct and unique aspect within China's history as well as its scientific history. This being alchemy. Alchemy within Chinese medicine holds a distinct and unique specificity to its history in medicine within China. Chinese alchemy is a historical Chinese scientific and technological perspective that conducts itself as a part of the larger tradition and culture of Taoism and its religious beliefs of the body and spirit, specifically its cultivation, which was developed for and from the traditional Chinese comprehension of medicine and the body over a large period of time within its history. Within this podcast, I will be going over various documents and historical precedents on the nature of alchemy and one of its most unique aspects, its pursuit and end goal of immortality. These documents range from actual primary sources to the writings of experts who have studied this topic and its myriad of subsequent ideas and concepts. Although Taoism and alchemy were deeply tied to the entirety of traditional Chinese medicine, it maintains a distinct and unique aspect in its pharmacopoeia, teachings, manipulation of the elite class, as well as its pursuit of immortality. To better understand the full extent as to why Taoism and its medicinal value is so unique, it's imperative to understand why traditional Chinese medicine has been studied as a unique aspect of medicinal history. Originally, Chinese medicine was closely tied more to demonology and occultism. You can typically see that most afflictions were thought to be attributed to the possession from spirits, demons, or other mythological beings. However, an important shift would occur within the medicinal history of China as a result of advancements in culture, technology, as well as large population shifts. As the population would grow, so too would the medicine within China change. And as a result, medicine would kind of really boom and shift away from this demonology. This is exemplified in a medicinal document titled The Inner Canon of the Yellow Emperor. When read, it is clear that the Inner Canon displays a deeper implementation of medicinal knowledge as well as establishing a more philosophical foundation. This document attests to the shift from demonology to a more specified medicinal approach. As it also shows the interaction between the body, temperature, location, herbal remedies, as well as the importance of the spirit or mental state. According to Chen Yu Ju, I'm sorry, I'm not really good at pronouncing names, the document, written during the Han Dynasty, explains that almost nearly every phenomenon in the universe is tied to philosophical concepts such as yin and yang, or opposites that are more intertwined. Transformative elements such as metal, fire, water, wood, earth, as well as a sort of inner life source known as qi. As a Western audience and as someone who lives in the United States as well, the concept of qi is very foreign to me, but when you read the Inner Canon of the Yellow Emperor, it's easier to understand that this qi that they refer to is a sort of universal life force, and a lot of it can be applied to literally any object in the universe, according to this document. For example, animals can have qi, even pharmacopoeia, and by pharmacopoeia I mean minerals used for medicine, minerals, herbs, anything that they perceived as something of medicinal value. As a result of this, traditional Chinese medicine within history would use this document as a base foundation for most of its history until the modern era with the introduction of more Western style medicinal practices. However, one question arises. Why does Taoism and its effects hold such a unique influence of its own on medicine as well as society within ancient China and its various dynasties? According to Michael Stanley Baker, Taoism and its medicinal uses both originated in the Shang dynasty between 1600 BCE to 1046 BCE. This was a very early dynasty within the history of China. A distinct feature of this time is that medicinal knowledge and the religion of Taoism share an origin, as spiritual leaders would attempt to determine the ailments of their political leaders using religious ceremonies. This would set a precedent as to how these religious and medicinal factors would go hand in hand within the form of alchemy, as well as how this would affect certain social groups, such as leaders and eventually the ruling class. Taoism and its influence on medicine would then expand within the Han dynasty, which lasted from 206 BCE to 220 AD. This was one of the most influential and long-lasting dynasties within the history of China, and as a result, Taoism and alchemy would likely have a very significant role from then on there within the history of China. What makes Taoism and its effects on Chinese medicine so important is how it utilizes the base knowledge of Chinese medicine, as I described about the inner canon of the Yellow Emperor, and gives us a sort of objective or goal. One of the primary goals of this medicinal practice in this era, alongside Taoism, was to cultivate the body in such a way that it would prolong life and even stave off death, essentially immortality. As the Taoist community expanded and influenced the religion more, medicine firstly began as remedies to diseases, then to cultivating the body, and this could be done through exercises, lifestyle change, certain practices, and even changes in the type of diet. And you'll see later on in the podcast I'll discuss the introduction of more foreign and typically minerals within their diet. That was cultivating the body, and then to finally nurturing the body to an extent that immortality would be achieved. Now, I have a quote from Michael Stanley Baker, and it says, "It was those who aspired to become transcendents who made it their primary study to cultivate the body, to become not only impervious to disease, but even death itself. Myth and hagiographies describe these human beings possessed of the knowledge of rare and exotic plant and mineral drugs, special fasting diets, and skills with talismans and spells which enabled them to ward off disease and death." This was taken from the Routledge Handbook of Chinese Medicine on page 405 for those that are interested. Now, this displays that Taoism in medicine took on a more specialized role, different from standard medicinal practices, and that its philosophies and pharmacopoeia play a pivotal role. However, in order to better understand alchemy within Taoism and its effects on the medicinal history of China, it's important to understand the underlying core and sciences behind the practice, as a lot of the key components depend upon it. And this even contributes to the uniqueness of alchemy and Taoism, as they go hand in hand and forge their own unique perspective on medicine within China. Now, in order to understand further the full complexity and definitions within alchemy, it's interesting to note how its philosophies contribute to its belief as well as its distinction. As alchemy and medicine under Taoism, medicinal prowess was distinct for the sole reason of its entire foundational system. Within Taoism, all ideas are created under a system of cycles, according to Nathan Sivan. He explains that most systems in China are explained on the basis of time as a philosophical concept, not merely just a mathematical one. This would include cycles, and a lot of these cycles kind of have different phases. So even the life cycle of any living organism, these phases would include birth, growth, maturity, decay, and death. This also extends to cosmological cycles, as well as the pharmacopoeia used during the time. Thus, this search for immortality in Taoism has a much greater nuance as it relates to not only physical drugs and pharmacopoeia, but also to spatial cycles, as well as larger philosophies on time, showing that this pursuit had a larger philosophical and almost scientific background that contributed greatly, not only just to medicine. I have a source here by Fabrizio Predagio. Sorry, I probably said that wrong as well. And he explains that within Chinese medicine and within Taoist alchemy, there are two types of medicine. There is Waidan and Neidan, both of which draw heavily upon the concept of time. The practice of Waidan refers to the alchemical and physical aspects of alchemy, specifically how metals form into elixirs. Now, elixirs are the pivotal part of alchemy in Taoism, as this was the main way to bring about immortality. Oftentimes people would drink these elixirs as if it was a drug to achieve immortality. Specifically, metals would be put into these elixirs, and they were required for the cultivation, and a lot of them, when the elixirs were created, have to be cultivated according to celestial cycles. Now, of course, celestial cycles such as planetary movement takes thousands of years, so oftentimes they would apply greater applications of mathematics. They would multiply days almost of the year to kind of almost create like a time ratio when creating these minerals and these elixirs. Oftentimes it mattered at the time of year these minerals would be harvested. But for the sake of longevity, we're going to be focusing on Waidan as it highlights the more alchemical focus of Taoism. Naidan, this is still a celestial application, but this is more relating back to the inner canon that I mentioned before, that it's really a more along the lines of cultivating that chi I mentioned, that life force. So Waidan is more external, physical, with drugs and pharmacopoeia. Meanwhile, Naidan is more internal, much more spiritual. Waidan's main purpose was to create these elixirs, mostly centered around turning metals and materials into gold or cinnabar, according to Nathan Sivan. And this is a very big trend among even other alchemy in other nations of the world. Gold was often seen as something that was pure and unable to decay, and is often seen analogous to immortality. And as a result, a lot of these elixirs were crafted following more celestial models. I already mentioned before, a lot of times it was important when and where these minerals would be extracted, and they had to be utilized according to a cycle. You cannot just, make an elixir when you feel like it. It has to be deeper. It needs to be more in tune with nature almost. This more celestial and temporal nuance displays and perfectly encapsulates the uniquity of Taoism and alchemy within traditional Chinese medicine. Specifically, alchemy in Chinese medicine not only utilizes a unique source for its medicines, but also calls upon the greater scientific nuances and background to create a more distinct connection to philosophy and science that likely expanded in tandem with the practice. The sheer fact that these elixirs are produced under strict transformative experiments, where celestial movements and analogous references to cycles in time displays that the practice of alchemy and the ultimate end goal of immortality has a more structured and unique underlying core that isn't present in other traditional Chinese medicine, where it was merely just to remedy diseases or even improve quality of life with lifestyle changes. As mentioned before within the podcast, a large part of what makes alchemy and Taoism within Chinese medicinal history is the specialized pharmacopoeia, as well as its application and actual practice within the populace of China. As mentioned in the podcast prior, a large part of Taoist alchemy and its pursuit of immortality was in the creation of its elixirs in order to become a almost transcendent being. For the purpose of the podcast, I'm going to be reading an excerpt from the Genie's Pharmacopoeia, and it's going to shed some light on the actual importance of these minerals and the creation of these elixirs for immortality. This is on page 178. The source is on the bottom of the screen right now. At the top of the Genie's Pharmacopoeia stands cinnabar. Second comes gold. Third, silver. Fourth, excrescences, which is more herbal. Fifth, the jades. Sixth, mica. Seventh, pearls. Eighth, real jar. Ninth, brown hematite. 10th, conglomerated brown hematite. 11th, quartz. 12th, rock crystal. 13th, geodes. 14th, sulfur. 15th, wild honey. And 16th, laminar malachite. After these come resins, truffles, yellow dock, liriope graminifolia, tree sesame, salamonia, gold thread, fern, mulberries, and sang chai. Yeah, I believe that's another herb. This is also known as chunlu. Other names for it are genie staff, lyceum, western queen staff, sky sperm, age dispeller, earthbone, and grass willow. Just from this excerpt alone, you can really tell that at the top is of importance within the pharmacopoeia is minerals, gold, silver, sulfur, and at the very bottom is more herbal. You don't really see that in other medicinal documents of the time. Really, it's more herbal remedies for diseases, but not in alchemy. It's a lot of minerals, a lot of precious metals, gold as well. I mentioned gold earlier in the podcast. This document really highlights how each and every material holds a distinct value that carries medicinal purposes, but also serves as an underlying goal of attaining immortality, a sense of transcendence, and in this case, what is known as becoming a genie. Genie is this sort of transcendent form that you can take, which interestingly enough is absent from other Chinese medicinal schools of thought at the time. Another aspect of this document that points to the uniqueness of Chinese alchemy is the pharmacopoeia being described. I mentioned before the gold, silver, mercury, and jade. They oftentimes would be cooked with alongside other pharmacopoeia materials, and as a result, a lot of these people with these precious metals, oftentimes difficult and expensive to obtain, would ingest these materials, believing that they'd transcend. Oftentimes, these people would suffer from effects, because we know now in the modern era you can't just ingest mercury or silver. But at the time, this really points out how deeply ingrained it was to this practice that minerals, these pure and almost abundant materials, kind of play a very important role in transcending organic human life, and eventually transcending to become an immortal person. Now, another interesting aspect of Taoist medicine is its practices in daily life. I mentioned earlier that Waidan is the more external uses, but this is going to be referring to a more internal, the Naidan. Specifically, Taoist medicine has a unique kind of application towards social groups, specifically in relation to women and their practices. Now, according to Elena Velusi, the source is on the bottom. You can see the works cited on the page right now. Views on women and sexual practices ranged in opinion from era to era. Originally, sexual practices were deemed as more acceptable among early Taoists, but later was looked down upon. This would be seen mostly due to segregation between the groups, between men and women. And as a result, a lot of the recommendations of sexual practices among women were subsequently written by men. So it was very difficult to kind of really determine the real recommendations that were given to women at the time, because Taoism was not just exclusively to men. Waidan might have been, considering the expensive application of the materials, but I mentioned earlier that there's that internal aspect, so really anyone could participate. And originally, sexual practices were seen as a way to return to proper levels of energy. The qi that I mentioned before, that was the largest part of Naidan, so a lot of times this is what would happen. Now I have an excerpt here from page 449 from Elena Velusi, and the excerpt discusses the Ming Dynasty techniques by Qing Taoist masters, and she's referring to a Clark Hudson, and Velusi references Hudson because in a document it claims that while humans unite within intercourse to conceive children, mostly as a biological process, it's believed that they lose a part of their life energy, and they reference that transcendence or Buddhas intermingle or copulate using their spirits of qi. And as a result, Velusi seems to cite that Hudson is referring to that intercourse unions result in a loss of vital energies, and that immortality is only achieved by uniting spiritually. So you can see that Naidan really has a big effect in how it affects people. This shows how more biological practices for women took on a more positive role under Taoism, unlike other religions, and is utilized in various texts as a step towards immortality through a different method, not just through elixirs, which is distinct and unique from other recommendations, because most of the time these lifestyle changes were just to remedy diseases. But here there's that end goal of returning a lost sort of energy and prolonging their life. And you can see that alchemy in China plays an important role in how its pursuit of immortality utilizes the unique pharmacopoeia I mentioned before with the Genie's Pharmacopoeia document, as well as differs in its recommendations of practices among specific groups. It has that deep social influence. However, how does this affect certain social groups within societies of China, specifically the political side? And I will go into that further soon enough. Another unique aspect to alchemy and Taoism that really contributes to the thesis I pointed towards forward is how it affected more wealthier classes within Chinese society, and eventually the ruling class in various eras and dynasties. Within the document, you can see up on screen that I cited. It's the titled, which is A Soup for the Khan, Chinese Dietary Medicine of the Mongol Era, as seen in Hu Sihui's Yinshan Zhengguao. Sorry, I mispronounced. Introduction, translation, commentary, and Chinese text. Now, this document really points out the dietary actions around this era. This era was really notable because it was ruled by not the typical ruling class that you'd expect in other Chinese dynasties, but this era was ruled by Kublai Khan. He was a Mongolian ruler and the grandson of Genghis Khan. What was most notable from this document is how elite classes within the inner court would often clash in their dietary preferences to the cultural foods the Mongolian rulers were more accustomed to. Specifically, within the inner court, there would be more vegetables eaten. Meanwhile, within the Mongolian rule, it was more akin to eating livestock, sheep, it mentions the document. And you can on page 8, it's alluded to that oftentimes these would clash and that several cultural factors still affected the diets of the people in the inner court, specifically the pursuit of immortality being one of them, and other superstitions. And Kublai Khan's era was they were essentially foreign rulers. They didn't have that history, so they would clash in their diets and what they preferred to eat. This emphasizes that Taoism was heavily popular among the upper class, showing that the pursuit of immortality was unique among richer individuals and would even persist into the era such as the Yuan dynasty, which is the era that we're talking about. Now, Taoism in China, as mentioned before in the podcast, expanded immensely in the Han Dynasty. So too did its influence within the elite and even the ruling class of China. Now, on the source that I have cited below on the screen, you can see the life and immortality in Han China. On pages 39 to 34, it describes this great expanse of an immortality cult almost, where the emperor or the ruler would often call out to people to try and find a way to achieve immortality, and a cult would form around the ruling class. People would go out and explore to find materials. They would find islands to try and find this step to immortality, and return to the emperor in order to gain favor. And you can notice that since it is in the Han Dynasty and there's still that sort of influence from older, almost shamanistic era of Chinese medicine, the document references almost sorcerers. You could interpret them as this cult of immortality was almost like a craze, a royal trend almost, and as a result, this really exemplifies and gives alchemy in Chinese medicine that really it shows that it deserves to be specified into and studied more deeply, because it not only was a unique and interesting perspective of medicine that dives deeper into minerals and this end goal of shedding one's humanity to become immortal, but it has that deeper social impact, especially among the ruling class. It was not typically among lower class individuals. It was a fervent belief that a lot of rulers would partake in these elixirs. And as a result, a lot of people would try to find these elixirs. They would be called immortalists to try and appease the emperor's pursuit of immortality. And that really contributes to the thesis I pointed to earlier, that alchemy and Taoism and medicine is very distinct because it has that specified impact on a certain social group, and deserves to be studied deeply as to why and how this medicinal pursuit really changed a lot of the eras and dynasties within Chinese history. As we can see, immortality in Taoism displayed a key and distinct portion of Chinese medicinal history. This deep and enriching history not only persisted throughout several eras, but also deeply affected various aspects of society, ranging from daily life to the upper echelons of Chinese society. Although Taoism and alchemy were deeply tied to the entirety of traditional Chinese medicine, it maintains a distinct and unique aspect in its pharmacopoeia, teachings, and as well as the manipulation of the elite class in its ultimate pursuit of immortality. It's interesting to note how Chinese alchemy is seen alongside European forms of alchemy, as well as other global equivalents. The uniqueness of Taoism and its synthesis of alchemy and this ultimate pursuit of immortality continues to persist in tandem throughout multiple eras within Chinese medicinal history. Eventually, this would seemingly die down after the introduction of Western medicine, but it's interesting to note how today in the modern era, where both of these schools of thought and medicine exist today, and the topic of immortality has become more popular in today's day and age. There are multiple movies, media that reference it, and there is talk in today's society that how can modern medicine bring about immortality or even prolong life? And it's interesting to note how this isn't some new concept, but really a deep and very ancient concept of achieving immortality. And I find it interesting and worthy of further study and comparison that an ancient medium of medicine that speaks of immortality is having a resurgence in a completely different scientific pursuit of medicine. And maybe eventually, when some form of immortality can be reached with either one, it'd be a very worthy and notable cause to compare this ancient pursuit with the more modern pursuit. Thank you for listening to the podcast. I'm going to show the sources that I displayed all together. Feel free to pause and look at them. Thank you so much, and have a nice day.